Hello, this is Dr. Ilene Serlin here, a dance movement psychotherapist. Dear Ilene, would you please introduce yourself and your work for us?
Thank you, Seda. I'd be glad to. I just wanted to say I'm so happy to see dance therapy growing here in Istanbul, and I'm delighted to be as helpful any way I can to help you grow it here. And it's been my love for my whole life. I was in the first program at Hunter College, 1971, graduated in 1973, spent those years in New York studying with Irmgard Barteniev, the Laban Institute, and the Gestalt Institute there with Laura Pearls. I did my doctorate in philosophy, in psychology under James Hillman and phenomenology. I'm currently living in San Francisco. I came out to teach at Saybrook University in 1988. I'm both a psychologist at this point and a dance therapist, but my love is always dance, and I keep coming home to it.
Oh, thank you. And we also know that you worked in Israel with Travma,
Yes.
which is actually this project is about. We're hoping to get some information about different fields, how they work with trauma, and how would you describe working with trauma and that process?
First of all, it's very important work, so thank you for doing it. It really needs to be done. You know, I've had some experience with other somatic approaches to working with trauma, and I think what dance therapy has to offer that is so very important is we work with dynamic movement. We're not just working with the body, we're working with the body in motion, we're working with the symbolic body, the communication, the expression, we're working with body in relation to others, and we're working in body across space. So we read the whole thing, and I think there's no other therapies that really works with the whole body-person environment in the way that we do. The way that I got into it, unfortunately, was by working in Israel. The first group I had, anyway, one of the women went running out of the room, and the others in the group asked me if I knew who she was, and she had come from a very well-known incident in Israel where her child was murdered by terrorists, etc., etc. And it was very shocking to me that in the ordinary lives of so many, and she was a professional therapist, as a matter of fact, working woman, art therapist, that ordinary people were living with these awful things. And I realized, as is said in Israel, that everybody's living with trauma, that it's not just the generations of trauma. People often identify themselves. I was at a conference where people identified themselves as first, second, third generation Holocaust survivors as a primary identity, and it affects so much of life in Israel. The sense of needing to protect and fight, and deprivation that's still there, existential anxiety. So really everybody has it. And in 2006, I was teaching through Lesley University there, and the war in Lebanon was going on. It was mostly women in the groups, but even so, they were bringing their cell phones to the groups because every day sons and husbands were being called up to the front to fight, and we were dealing with news every day of it, and it had to become part of the group process. And I realized that there was no escaping it. And so I began to get really interested in it and visit some of the trauma centers. So I've worked with a couple of different trauma centers in Israel, fairly close to them. One is actually run by an expressive therapist in Tel Aviv, and they use the arts there in the most beautiful way, from photography workshops to arts, but also a lot of movement and dance therapy. They take people out into nature. So I'm kind of on a crusade to try to bring dance therapy more into trauma work in the United States, just because for such sad reasons Israel has a lot to teach, and the way they've used creative arts very effectively in their trauma work.
Thank you. And maybe one last question. What would you suggest professionals working with trauma to keep in mind all through that process? Maybe one of the most important things.
I'll tell you what comes to mind first, which is just, I think dance therapy in general is extremely powerful. You go right away to an instinctual level of fear and and dread and hope and life and death on a body level. And so to be very careful, to move very slowly. And I always try to remember to start out with grounding and feelings of safety in the body, so that, you know, if there was a time when there was a trauma and you left our bodies or dissociated, it doesn't feel safe to come back in. Mm-hmm. So in order to invite people home back to their bodies, it really has to be made safe, and they have to feel the strength to be able to tolerate the intense feelings that comes with that. So it's really building the strength slowly, and a lot of work with grounding and strength building.
Thank you very much for all these valuable information that you shared with us. We're hoping to see you again in Istanbul.
Thank you.
Teşekkür ederim. Teşekkürler.